Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I think we can go ahead and get started. It's so lovely to see everybody on this evening. My name's Stephanie Walton. I'm a researcher at the Center for Food Policy, and I'm so excited to chair this webinar this evening with Kim Bell, who we're very lucky to have tonight. The Food Thinkers series is all about hearing from women in academia, business, civil society, and beyond with big ideas about redesigning food systems. And we're so happy to have Kim Bell tonight, the founder of Small Food Bakery in Nottingham. Before I hand it over to Kim, I'm just going to make a few housekeeping notices quickly. First, if you want to stay up to date on events and research and all the interesting things we have coming out of the Center for Food Policy, please sign up for our monthly newsletter. Elaine is going to put a link in the chat box for that. One exciting announcement is that we have a new job opportunity. We're actively looking for a reader or a professor with expertise in any specialist area relevant to food policy to join us in driving change towards a more effective food system. So applications are open until the 31st of May, and you can find out more info at the link that Elaine will share in the chat. Applications are also open for our MSc in food policy and our new and exciting BSc in nutrition and food policy, details of which you can find in the link that Elaine will send. And now onto our presentation. So this webinar is going to be recorded and will be made available online afterwards via our YouTube channel. As Kim is going through her presentation, please write any questions that you have into the Q&A, not into the chat box, but into the Q&A. Feel free to send them in as you have them so that we can start sorting through and organizing as we go along. We'll read these out to Kimberly after she's given her talk, and we'll try to respond to as many as we can, but please send through any and all questions. If you'd like to tweet, please do so using the hashtag #FoodThinkers and the handle #FoodPolicyCity. And our next Food Thinkers is going to be on the 21st of June, where we're going to host Jess Duncan, who will be talking about her framework for democratizing research to inform food policy. So make sure to sign up for that. We'll be sending out the invite shortly. And now, without further ado, I'll introduce Kimberley. She's the founder and head baker of the award-winning Small Food Bakery in Nottingham, England. She's also the winner of the BBC Food and Farming Award in 2018 for the best food producer. And she's also the founder of the UK Grain Lab, which is a meeting that brings together farmers, millers, bakers, academics, and advocates to collaboratively navigate a path forward to a more sustainable and equitable grain system in the UK. She's just hosted her, I believe, the second very successful Grain Lab, and we're thrilled to have her here today and learn from her. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Kimberley. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hope you can hear me okay. So my background is actually quite different from where I've ended up in bakery. And I used to run a construction company, and we specialized in the fit out of small food retail shops for large corporate clients. I was very proud of the business that we ran, and I think we did things a little differently. It was a family run business. We created good jobs for people, and we worked in different ways, being quite dynamic in our procurement systems. But effectively, the clients that we work for, I couldn't quite reconcile with. They were blue chips like McDonald's. Well, we all know about that, and Starbucks, and that was all about supersizing and sweetening coffee, and BP oil was our other main client. And aside from the obvious fossil fuel issues, the main revenue from a petrol station is the sale of crisps. The other thing was that in construction of these shops, we built and then knocked them down again every 5 years to correspond with changing market trends, and I watched them come and go. It was 15 years of experience that taught me everything I needed to know about how food should not be represented in our culture. I've always been a cook and a baker in various guises. It's where my passion has lied, even though that wasn't necessarily what my job was. And towards the end of this 15-year stint in construction, I'd started to read a lot about a food revolution in the US, stories of the preservation of cultural identities in food, new farming practices that could restore soils, community kitchens, and a surge of exciting food producers who were all innovating with new products and cuisines, and some amazing work that was being done to look at the decommodification of staple foods, like the work being done to give identity and purpose to wheat at WSU Bread Lab. They were bringing bakers along for the ride, and there was something about that that really caught my imagination. I'm going to start with some background, just some fun facts about our food system in the UK. So this was some data from the early days of the bakery. It's a bit out of date now, but it just gives you a bit of an idea of the scale of our food sales in the UK at 180 billion. And at the time of these statistics, we were purchasing approximately 98% of all of our food from supermarkets. And it was even more shocking to me at the time that 70% of it was from only 4 major retailers. I thought, as I was reading around the subject, that this seemed to be the crux of the problem, was this kind of oligopoly of supply, leading to what I sort of felt in my heart was not a particularly good cuisine for the people of the UK. You could challenge that and say that the supermarkets provide choice and good value, but interestingly, I found this data from back in 2014, which was the year that I started the bakery, and it shows you the top 10 grossing food and drink retail products in the supermarket system at that time. So if we could say that this is a representation of the sort of cuisine it was promoting, and hopefully you can see all the line items, it's pretty shocking, I think, and I think it's perhaps a stark warning as to the need to do things differently. Particularly of interest to me as a baker, where obviously the product's a little bit lower down. You'll see the King's Mill White Standard 800-gram loaf, that's 135 million pounds grossing in 1 year. And then 2 steps down, another white loaf, and 2 steps down, another white loaf. And those are all the same product, they're just made under different brands. But that's a significant amount of money we spend in the UK on this particular type of bread, the same kind of bread. So I began Small Food Bakery in 2014 as a response in repulsion of the big food system, hence the name and almost everything that followed. Here's the space that I began the bakery in. This is an old Victorian primary school building on the outskirts of Nottingham city centre. It's quite a beautiful building, but as you'll see, it's not on a high street. It's not a high street retail store, and actually, to get to the bakery, you have to go in through these kind of old, slightly grubby, big red doors and walk into the building. The building's part of an arts centre called Primary, and that's significant that I chose to be in an arts centre and in a community of thinkers and creators rather than setting up business on a high street. The space inside looks a bit like this, or looked a bit like this when this photograph was taken, although it was continuously evolving. And on the door, we have quite clearly stated the mission of the bakery, which after some thinking, we arrived at. Our mission is to manufacture delicious foods using ingredients directly traded and traceable back to healthy soil and good people. That was a simple explanation for a very complex way of working, which I'll try to unpack a little bit for you. But it seemed to have the essence of what I felt was the opposite of this very faceless and mysterious big food system. Was if we were going to do things differently, we really needed to trace things back and understand the significance of all of our procurement decisions with all of our ingredients. So over some time, the space evolved into a small-scale, semi-industrial food production kitchen, making bread, pastry, pies, preserves, and fermented foods and drinks. But it was also a grocery store selling all of the ingredients used in the kitchen or produced by the growers in our network. We trade directly with growers and customers, and that's really important. All of our produce is sold directly from the kitchen space, and we open 3 days a week. It's my belief that we need to stop validating the common misnomer that we need to feed our growing global population and start focusing on the more realistic and useful challenge of truly nourishing people around us, beginning with ourselves, extending to our family, friends, and wider community, whoever they may be. And that will be different for everyone. But this is capped with a caveat that in doing this work, we must not impede the work of anyone else anywhere in the world to be able to uphold their right to do the same. If we could all take part in a food system like this, the world would surely be more than fed, it would be nourished. It's a logic that holds true to me. It's been challenged by just about everyone and everything all the time in the 8-year journey of small food. But through this 8 years of real lived practice, I haven't been discouraged. When you change the word feed for the word nourish and add the responsibility to butt out of other people's cultures, we begin a fairly major narrative shift, and the complexity of the challenge begins to reveal itself. That's my motivation for starting the bakery 8 years ago was a bit selfish, and it was motivated by my own appetite. Having been a passionate cook and baker all of my life, I loved the processes, and I felt really comfortable being in the role of feeder. It's worth mentioning, though, that outside of the awful celebrity and elitist restaurant culture, working as a cook, chef, front of house, or baker is not commonly respected as a meaningful career in the UK. It's often perceived as low-skilled work, possibly a temporary stopgap for young people who then move on to better things. And this is a huge failing of our culture. It's fundamental to me that if we are to make our food system more nourishing and delicious, we need to value the people that work within it. I felt like appetite was quite a key idea, and I'm quite obsessed with tomatoes. And one of the reasons, aside from the political reasons of naming the bakery Small Food, was just this very visceral experience that I'd had of tasting foods that had come from really small scale production, like people's backyards and allotments, and realizing they were much more delicious. And maybe these small scale systems could deliver something like more joyful and more interesting. And the more you kind of become obsessive as a cook about your ingredients, the more you realize that there's diversity even in one tomato plant. And there's such a beauty in that. The tomato that's closer to the greenhouse glass, for example, is going to taste different to the one that's buried under the leaves. And there's this sort of lifelong, never-ending journey of discovery to be had. And I think there's a lot of potential for these jobs in food to be way more rewarding and way more interesting than they currently are in the main. I come to the realization, like back in 2014, that the only food available for me to buy in the city where I live was fairly tasteless. No wonder people don't like vegetables, I thought. They don't taste of anything when procured through our prevailing food system. For me, working directly with amazing and organic and biodynamic farmers, and therefore very, very good quality and very fresh produce, I've now experienced very tangibly what we were missing in terms of joy at the table, flavour, connection, learning, the relationships that come with that, and the strength in the community. A small food system, essentially. There's no going back. I've just listed what I think are like the 4 Ds of our small food system, which is about diversity. It's about the diversity and choice of ingredients and the decentralization of power. And creating a sense of democracy in the system where the people who work within the system actually get a say in the sorts of things that get made and how they're distributed. Delicious is obviously one of the most important of those 4 Ds. Having had a bit of experience in business, I realised from the outset that a different model was required if my ideals were to be upheld in a self-sustaining business. And I should clarify that small food, despite the variety of things it has been and has achieved, is actually just a limited company and has received no grant funding or subsidy of any kind other than my own investment. So my ambition was to try to prove that it could stand up even in a trading environment that was built around an entirely different set of values. I'm going to run through some of the key features of small food just to try to illustrate to you how I think it operates differently to conventional food producing businesses. So one of the key features, which I realised from early on, and actually was my motivation for taking a space in an arts centre rather than on a high street, is that it's really important to create space and time and avoid the lock-ins of the prevailing business culture that put pressure on business owners to replicate the current system. Having a space in this arts centre at Primary was a low rent pressure for me, but it's also a low retail or footfall pressure, and both of those things were equally as important. The low rent allowed me to experiment, and the low retail pressure, low footfall, actually allowed me a bit of space and time to have a dialogue with the customers that did come in. The people who came, they came with intention and they wanted to take part. And that's a very different feeling from being on the front line of service in a busy shop or a restaurant. There's no fancy equipment in the bakery. You can see here Laura processing some plums by hand. And that's really significant. I think I was fairly clear from the outset that it was important to invest in people over time and good ingredients in the moment, rather than lots of machinery up front, which causes you to work in a specific way. It locks you into working in a specific way, and it removes your ability to wax and wane and change things as you see fit. Another thing that was important is that we're only open 3 days a week. Customers were often a bit puzzled by this, and they would say, what do you do the rest of the week? Do you have another job? And that just kind of illustrated to me how inconceivable it was to people that there was so much work involved in scratch-made food production that they couldn't quite imagine that when the shop wasn't open, that we might actually just be there working really hard. But the 3 days a week allowed us to maintain quality and be thoughtful in our work. And when we were open for service, we were able to give customers the attention they deserve. We also set the business model from day one to close 8 weeks a year for rest and renovation. The other thing was to avoid unnecessary management hierarchy. All jobs were equal in small food, and everyone was made accountable for the tasks that they've been allocated. So there was an efficiency in that, and it created space for everybody to have autonomy in their work. The next thing that I think is really significant about the way that small food operated was that everything we did was really transparent. So here's a picture of the shop at some point, and it just gives you a bit of an idea of how we work. So this is actually a production kitchen and a shop. When we were open the 3 days, we would move all the furniture around, and we set up some chairs and tables, and we'd create a counter. We carry on working in the background. You can see a baker continuing to work in the background. We also invited some of our producers in to showcase their products, things that we would use in our baking, but then we wanted to share them with our wider, with our customer base and let them take them home. And this is a real show of transparency that's very personable. It's not blockchain or any of those kind of tech solutions to transparency that don't really mean anything to people. It's just simply an open kitchen where production is visible all the time. All of our ingredients are on display, so there's nowhere to hide. Not that we had anything to hide, but it just gave the customers a sense of authenticity, I think, in everything we did. It enabled us to bring customers along for the ride, opening up dialogue and fostering respect between the customer and the baker. In this situation, we're not anonymous or invisible. They can see how hard we work, and we can hear their feedback and concerns and respond and evolve. Lots of friendships were formed over the tables at Small Food, and it was wonderful to watch and feel like we were creating an atmosphere where that could happen. Oh, this is a picture of one of my favourite customer visits, and it's important to remember that farmers need to be customers too. And I think it was a proud moment when a tractor trailer and a farm dog and a farmer pulled up and asked for some croissants really early in the morning. The other thing that we really aimed to do was to include our customers in a lot of the stories that we told around ingredients. And this is the Small Food team at some point visiting 2 different times of year, visiting our some of the farmers we work with. And these were wheat crops that we intended to work with, and just kind of building those open relationships were really important, where we could discuss what was happening and we felt a connection to those crops. Customers would sometimes come with us on these walks, and that was really important to us too. And then they would reciprocate by sort of pitching in to help with events that we were doing. Or during the pandemic, some of our customers even jumped in to do some major construction work to allow us to keep trading. One of the other really significant ways in which Small Food operates differently is that we have product design that's led by ingredients and completely flexible and open to change. Most food factories design a product based on a perceived market demand, and then they go to the marketplace to find the component parts, usually at the cheapest price. We work completely the other way around, and we build our product range around what ingredients we can get from farmers or growers we know and can have a relationship with. This ensures we learn about the parameters of the farming and growing. We can make appropriate decisions to fall in line with the more natural outputs of the land and agriculture around us. It also creates long-term valuable feedback loops that help us build useful foodways in collaboration for the future. We, as well as seeking out wonderful examples of farming, agroecological farming to work with on ingredients, we also opened up a barter system. One of the problems we had in Nottingham was that there were no commercial fruit growers. And so the only way that we could get local fruit that wasn't grown with chemicals was actually either to pick it ourselves, and there's a picture of Laura, one of the bakers, going to do some gleaning at one of our customers' gardens, or we could put shout out for customers to bring in their surplus from gardens and allotments. And this worked really well because it brought in a whole section of our community who were maybe really interested in food and had time to garden and grow things, but perhaps weren't particularly cash rich. And so it could be off-putting to come to a bakery and buy ready-made produce, but they really appreciated having their produce valued by us as being some of the best, and then being able to exchange it and barter. It was quite a powerful tool for opening up the community. We work with farmers who grow non-commodity grains, and that's really important as bakers and quite unusual. And I think it's really important to recognise that our seed system and our cereal seed system is very complex and built on intellectual property rights and all kinds of layers of power and control. So working with the farmers in the previous photograph has enabled us to have some say in what sorts of seeds we include in our bread system, upholding the values that we have, which is that food should be a commons and shouldn't be able to be patented or owned by very few companies. So working in this way, we've smashed through many dogmas in baking. I was told when I started the bakery, and I was actually not a particularly experienced baker. I've never had any formal training, but I think there's benefit that comes with not being burdened by prior knowledge, or maybe just sort of gung-ho ignorance that keeps propelling you forward. But working in this way, we've smashed through quite a few of these dogmas. I was told when I started the bakery that UK-grown organic wheat was not good enough for bread making, and we worked through that. These are some of the breads that we've made with UK-grown local organic wheat. We were told that a croissant could not be made using natural leavens without commodity sugar and without high-protein flour, and all of these things have to be imported. We worked through that, and now we have viennoiserie, and these are some donuts that are all made with organic, low protein, local wheat, local honey, and they're all naturally leavened. It took a long time to get here, but where there's a will, there's a way, and we just kept trying and we worked on a practice. And as a team, we made it. It's really hard to solve these problems. It's hard work, challenging the dogmas of an entire industry, but it does actually have like tremendous benefits beyond the actual products themselves, which are delicious. For the bakers and cooks, it forces them to accept and expect uncertainty and upskill accordingly. These are skills for life, and we're well prepared for the future. Another characteristic of small food is that we learned from farming. We learned from learning about farming that diversity was really one of the core values that we should uphold in our baking practice. And we promote this at every level in the design of the business, including in the workers' roles. So all of the team at Small Food rotate roles. This is just a busy photograph of the bakery, maybe just showing you the complexity of some of the things that go on. The advantage of having this complexity and having people making different products and taking a kind of responsibility for them removes risk for the business. Quite simply, it's a very real problem with handmade things that people get RSIs, so keeping them moving through the different processes through the week and not having the same person just continuously working on the same thing was really important. But also, by swapping people around and getting them to do different jobs, it builds a common sense empathy towards colleagues and therefore increases the supportive nature of the team. It also removes hierarchy. As I said before, there's no management tiers to the way that small food operates. Everyone has their section for that particular day and they take responsibility for it. And I think this autonomy kind of leads to more resilience, a diverse input of ideas, the ability to move forward faster. So a more dynamic and quickly evolving set of skills within the team. It trains people in coping with change and uncertainty, which is really important when dealing with natural ingredients that change with the season. And it builds a stronger team that can cope with absence and who can cross-train new people and teach visitors who come to the bakery intrigued by what we do and why it's different. Another key principle of small food for me was that I wasn't interested in growth. I guess the clue's in the name, but there comes a point working in this space where it's just working nicely and there's a limit to how many meaningful relationships you can hold. And that was really the limiting factor for the scale of the business. It was really important to me that everyone who works with the business could earn a living. And beyond that, I wasn't particularly interested in growth. I was never going to sell this business. So how do you move forward, or how do you hold on to your ambition in that regard? Well, we focused on lateral growth instead of vertical integration. And here's a few examples of businesses that have spun out of small food and have become part of our community, or come from our community and remain part of our community. And I'm really interested in this idea of perpetuating the small businesses and small food producing businesses across the city. This is Ambergoo Bakery that opened earlier this year, and you'll see Emily and Sarah, who were small food bakers, have set this up across the other side of town, and it's really wonderful now to see another bakery working with similar values to small food and producing delicious things that I get to go and buy and eat as a customer, and it's really exciting. Another project that spun out of small food was a pop-up called Pasta Shambhala, which happened in January. I bought a pasta machine a couple of years ago out of boredom in lockdown, and we've been tinkering with it ever since. It seemed to me to be a really good way to showcase some of the diversity of grains that were coming in from our local farmers and tell those stories to customers. And this really caught the imagination of Shambhala, who was brave enough to take it on as a pop-up project. And this was just fantastic. It was really exciting, well received by the customers, and a really good opportunity for Shambhala and partner Greg to have some imagination space to think about what a business might look like if they were to pursue this, and learn a bit about business modelling. Another project that the small food team have collaborated on and are super proud to be part of the history of and the making of is Wakelands Bakery in Suffolk, down on an agroforestry farm that informed a lot of my ideas in the early days of baking. And this is some pictures of the team taking part in the opening party of Wakelands Bakery. And I just wanted to put this in to show how we're a much wider community. And even though we're a small business, our reach extends into other businesses, and we all help each other out as a real sense of community. In addition to these, there's one of our barter allotment growers has hopefully got a new market garden underway, and I look forward to supporting that in the future. And we've managed to establish Nottingham Mill Co-op, which is held in a stone mill held in trust in a social enterprise, which can be ultimately used by lots of people in Nottingham. There's another nice picture of us at Wakelands with Henrietta of Wakelands Bakery, preserving some fruit for the season with other bakers who came to support. Another key feature of small food is that we needed to change the cultural narrative within the team and business. This is just a photograph of the team at the end of last year, which is really nice. Not everybody there, but it gives you an idea of the people involved. And the sorts of culture that we kind of promoted was when things don't work, it's part of a journey. Products don't need to be perfect. We learned to repair, reuse, and constantly improve knowledge and skills through making mistakes. Another thing was that pay was never used as a reward nor a measure of success, but discussed in the context of the team as a whole. We worked together to increase our pay prospects over time. We tried to remember to always look after our bodies, good meals, breaks. We limited baseline rotas to 36 hours a week, which is very unusual in the baking and hospitality industry, and limit to a 4-day working week. And we built a social, familial culture around the team. We eat together. We take time out to visit farms and learn from others and intern in other businesses, take part in the culture of other businesses, as well as welcoming visitors. One of the other things that we did, I think that was really important, is that we networked with scientists to learn about the impact of our work and our decision-making in the bakery. It was a good mirror to reflect what we were doing and a fantastic educational opportunity for us to become better at what we were doing. This is Professor Martin Wolf, who established Wakeland's agroforestry and taught me an enormous amount of diversity, not only in at farm scale, but right down to our wheat seeds. And that's me holding a hand of the YQ Wakeland's wheat population, which we bake with. And Martin taught me a lot about diversity in seed genetics. And it's interesting to me how the philosophy of all of the science kind of extends from the seed to the soil through the farming system and right into the bakery in an urban setting. The values are the same and they should be carried forward. This is another example of working with scientists from Nottingham University, some of the team sitting down to do a sensory evaluation of our bread products, and this helped us to improve our baking and our product range, and also to evaluate sometimes when you're working with a crop that's a bit difficult to work with, or you've gone through a bit of a journey with it. And we often didn't have a clear perspective as to how brilliant the products were sometimes. And so sitting down and doing this out of context really helped us to contextualize and then advise our customers better on what they might enjoy. This is a banner that we made together. We all sewed it. And then we went to Terra Madre, which is a global celebration of small food producers and peasant farmers around the world. And that was a really important part of the culture of small food, is that we took these trips together and we made sure that our voices were represented at these big gatherings. And that, I think, gave a lot of validation to our work. One of the things that we tried to embed in the culture of the business was the need to learn to teach, and that was kind of evident in everybody's roles. We welcomed a lot of visitors to the bakery, and that gave us a great opportunity to try to teach what we learned and in turn improve our own skills. The other thing is the business modelling and all the financial reporting was shared with the team regularly. There was complete open book culture with everybody in the business. And lastly, in marketing, we are very careful with language that reinforces dangerous intrinsic values. I respect everyone's right to opt in or out of food and medicines as they see fit for them. But in the business, we really tried to avoid using or reinforcing labels like gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, which I've come to believe to be reductive or unhelpful in changing the narrative around food and farming in the UK. That might be a bit contentious, but there are other seemingly innocuous examples too that might be surprising. Like, for example, just saying something's the best. Is that really helpful? Is that helpful language? We played a big part at Small Food in changing and influencing the wider cultural narrative around bread and grains, bread being one of our staple products and activities. We established UK Grain Lab, conference to bring together millers, farmers, scientists, academics, storytellers to imagine a new kind of grain system in the UK. We hosted it in our space and we provided a convivial atmosphere and some good food to get everybody enthused about having these conversations. We started in 2017, had another gathering in 2018, and 2 weeks ago, fortunately with Stephanie present, we hosted our biggest ever gathering of 250 people. We also took part in other farming conferences and often did the catering for them, trying to take the role of feeding back interesting ingredients that these farmers grown to them and enabling them to see it through our eyes. This is a picture of Anya, one of the small food bakers, giving out tasters of small biscuits that were made with samples of wheat and barley that were grown in a live seed EU trial and showcased on this farm as part of a conference called NOC. When we arrived at NOC for the first time, intrigued by these wheat trials and what we could learn, we realised that no one was actually eating or tasting the crops as part of their evaluation. and that the cooks and bakers being missing from these conferences was really significant, because people had forgotten to look at flavour as a key indicator of success in plant breeding and crop development. As part of our work in UK Grain Lab, we've also been lobbying for changes in the seed marketing laws to break seed monopolies in the UK, and leading by example, working with new crops of interest to organic and agro-ecological farmers. This slide is just to represent the work we've been doing to actively build a local grain supply network and taking part in the seed selection with farmer John in the white shirt and Miller Paul in the jacket. That's Paul's Windmill, Tuxford Windmill in North Nottinghamshire. And this is just to illustrate that we've built this local grain chain that's, or grain network, I should say, that's only 50 miles between the bakery, spanning the bakery, the farm and the mill, and we're particularly proud of that, and all of the seed exists outside of the commodity seed system. This has expanded. This began with a collaboration between the three of us, has now expanded into a much wider network. Many bakeries and more farmers and millers are coming into the fold. This is a project that I've been working on within small food called the Population Loaf, and it was really inspired by Martin Wolf and his YQ, Wakeland's Population, and the idea of diversity and democracy and the decentralisation of our food systems, and whether or not we could capture all of those values in the loaf. I won't go into the detail of this slide, just to say that an awful lot of work has gone into developing this whole grain sourdough that's intended as a sandwich loaf. It stays fresh for 2 weeks, handmade by us in the bakery with no non-food ingredients. And we have been working really hard to find ways to present it and package it in a way that appeals to a much broader audience, a much wider population. And then looking at the costings of the loaf to look at how we could invent a system of self-subsidy to provide it in the local newsagent, for example, at a slightly lower cost. And also for free to some food banks. This is an ongoing project, but it's the sort of thing that small businesses can do with passionate people involved. Another project that happened last year was that Emily and I, baking at Small Food, were a bit kind of bored in the pandemic lockdown, and we wanted to do something. We felt like we weren't moving forward, so we decided we needed a stone mill in Nottingham city centre, and that maybe if we could put this beautiful small-scale stone mill in city centre in a shop window, it might inspire more bakers and more people to get involved with our local grain network that was building slowly, and maybe we could help speed things along. So we fundraised and brought this beautiful mill over from Vermont, and it now sits proudly on a marketplace in Nottingham city centre, and we've founded, along with Emma Shires, Nottingham Mill Co-op to hold it in trust for future bakers and budding want-to-be millers to come and have a go. We hope it will inspire people in the future. That was a lot of information. I'm going to conclude now. Basically, I get tired of being told that we're too small to make a difference at Small Food. And I think we've proven otherwise. But it's true that as a wider society, we really need to mobilise an army of small food producers, I think, working in this way. There's an exodus of workers leaving hospitality industry post-COVID, or who have left post-COVID, and after many years of feeling undervalued, but they've got the skills for building conviviality and for holding space and for containment and cultural change making. They're looking for meaning and purpose and to be respected and valued. So let's build the infrastructure and put the support systems in place to put their skills back at the heart of our communities, doing the right kind of work. We need to find a way for many small autonomous food businesses to begin and thrive in the long term. We urgently, desperately, longingly need them if we're to support the changing narratives in agriculture that are so important right now. There is already a reframing of communities outside cities, with the opportunity for food businesses to thrive in suburbs. High streets are coming back to life. We just need to stop the fast food chains from moving in and protect low rents and band together to support the birth of more bakeries and more customer-facing food production businesses. Cities are changing too. There are a lot of empty properties in Nottingham right now. And is this an opportunity to rebalance rents and bring some life back to these monocultural spaces? Despite our best efforts, our city is mainly made up of fast food, mini supermarkets, bars and betting shops, and it looks a lot like many other regional cities in the UK. Can we place food production back into the cities and make it visible? Mills, dairies, broth and noodle shops, bakeries, charcuterie, butchery, maybe even a sacred space for the slaughter of animals. We need to build covered markets with entry-level rental units. Can we offer rent and rate relief for food production businesses that use local produce? Can the council support infrastructure that helps people access these facilities? We need to provide the educational and mentoring frameworks to enable the leaders of these businesses to be confident to imagine and design and then run them very differently to the prevailing system. How about a college of agroecological food production and retail? That would be nice to see. I could talk about this all day, all week, all year. It's complex and nuanced and beautiful and hopeful and terrifying all at the same time. But to offer a conclusion, if there even is one, we urgently need to change the narrative in our wider culture. And I believe that diversity of small-scale, empowered, autonomous food production and retail businesses is a key component in meeting that challenge. Showing people, not telling people. Creating the space for them to use their amazing imaginations to build food systems in new ways, in kindness and with reciprocity, not just recreating the old system. It's important to remember that we are all the food system and our engagement in it determines our survival. I love this quote from Tara Jensen. She has a great book, she's a bakery called Smoke Signals. And I really believe it after all this time that as we make bread, we make ourselves. Excuse me. So what next for small food? My ambitions are sort of still forming. The bakery's been closed for a few months for renovation. I'm really excited to reopen it in July. My ambition extends beyond small food, and my vision, I would really like to see 100 small food shops birthed around Nottingham with a similar ethos, all owned and led by different people, but supported in a network. Products and relationships should be appropriate to their passions and best serve the communities they're in. But I think the values can be held in common. So I think I'd like to establish a more formal internship programme at Small Food to encourage and mentor others in any way that I can to help them have the confidence to build these businesses. I also think that as a collective, we should establish an urban land trust to provide suitable properties and supportive financial structures for these businesses to be brought into life. My other ambition is to get the population loaf into regular production and share that story widely as a way for people to reimagine the bread system. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kimberly. It's great and interesting and inspiring and challenging. I am going to invite everybody to submit your questions into the Q&A box, but I'm going to take advantage of my being chair to ask the first question. You raced through towards the end some really important and interesting ideas for how policy and political advocacy might be used to support the proliferation of these kinds of bakeries. And I wondered if you might just perhaps linger on one or two of those just a little bit longer. If you were to, have people start advocating for a certain set of actions or policies, particularly in urban areas, that were to support more bakeries opening in their neighborhood, especially ones that work with the kind of ingredients that you do, where would you say people should focus? Where would you want people to start prioritizing?
Well, in Nottingham, we've got a big problem with high rents, given the size of the city and the opportunity for trading. I think the rents are disproportionately high. But one of the obvious problems to me is that it's completely fallen out of fashion, I suppose, to have food production in the city centre. So I'm really lucky to just be on the edge of the city in a space that's fairly low rent. But if I was to move into service people who were in the city centre, it'd be almost impossible for me to justify paying high retail rent just to store a pallet of flour, for example. So, a lot of the activity that we undertake as food producers, it's fairly low margin and requires lots of space. And I think one of the things I would love to see changed is maybe some kind of designation of certain buildings or areas or spaces for a combination of food production and retail, where there's therefore a recognition in our culture that the price of the rent needs to reflect that dual purpose. So I don't know how retail rents have become so valuable and production rents have are much lower, and as a result of that, the production spaces have been moved out of the city and have become invisible. So I'd love to see that brought back into busy places. I want to see people making my food. I want to see the equipment they use. I want to see the ingredients they've got. And I think some kind of policy shift in the planning department to create those spaces would be really helpful. There's add-ons to that as well, like just providing really simple infrastructure like covered marketplaces and parking for people to be able to use these facilities with convenience would be good. I mean, why not even have like collective shopping carts? We've got scooters going around all the city. Like, why can't we think about collective imaginative infrastructure that supports people doing their shopping in lots of small businesses?
Yeah, great. Very interesting. And could you speak a little bit to how you had to do, or if you had to do any outreach or communication with your customers, either when you got started or even now, both on bringing them in since you weren't kind of benefiting from large footfall and a little bit tucked away, as well as kind of the difference in the products that you were selling and probably the prices that people were used to, what that education process was like with your customers?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over the time. So when I first opened, it was just me and Sarah for a time, and we had very low footfall. So most of the outreach work was done in conversation with people. We had a lot of time that we could give people. And as the bakery got busier, we had to get a bit more creative about how we engaged people and made them feel like part of a community. It was always a drive to never make the bakery feel simply transactional. It always had to be more than just a transaction. It always had to be more of an experience. And we did quite a lot of things. Some of them were very unplanned. For example, if family came in and they had children of a certain age and we happened to be making pizza, we sometimes just offer the kids to come behind the counter and make their own pizza. And it was just really a little bit like that for a long time. It was about not being afraid of those barriers and not being like, oh, that's a bit against health and safety, or, we could solve those problems, and just be a bit more human about it. So a lot of it was just done relationally like that, just in conversation. We have done a lot of events and trialed a lot of different ways to engage people. One of the wackiest was this thing called school dinners, where we would prepare a meal that was quite low price point and invite people to come and purchase the meal, and they could sit in the bakery or in the wider building and eat it. Or if they wanted to, they could step behind the counter and make it themselves. So we would set up 3 workstations, and we would guide them through the process, for example, of making potato gnocchi and then dressing it simply with some cheese. So there'd be a station to make the gnocchi, a station to boil the gnocchi, and they'd be guided by one of the cooks, but they'd pay the same price, no matter whether they opted to have it cooked for them or whether they wanted to jump in. And that really helped build some fantastic relationships with our customers. We took them along to farm walks and events whenever we could as well. And I think that really helped them see things from our perspective. But a lot of the customers were also suppliers. The barter system worked really well. And the people who grew have a lot of respect for quality produce, so that was reciprocated. And one of the most fantastic things we did was actually, during the pandemic, we just had a brief moment where lockdown eased, and we were able to take 60 of our customers to walk in the wheat just prior to harvest at the farm that's 50 miles away. And that was a really magical experience, I think, for all of them. And they saw things through our eyes, and they saw the grain store and how that was where their food was going to be stored for the year. And I think it had quite a profound effect on them. I think, to probably answer your question, we've spent, over the years, we've dreamt up so many fun and sometimes very silly ways of engaging people, and it's all been pretty successful, and we haven't really just stuck to one thing, we just kept it moving. So yeah, it's just very human, it's just person to person, not too structural, I guess.
Great. Okay, we've had one question come in from Sophia on in urban areas, how do you de-gentrify Whole Foods, in particular sourdough bread and small bakeries, which can be kind of associated sometimes with more artisanal and upper class food consumption. So how have you approached that or thought through that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think about it a lot, and I think it's quite difficult for me to offer an example of how that is done, but in my defense, what I would say is that I'm part of an international arts community, and we create products that are for that community, for the place where we're based. So we certainly fit the mold of, some of these artisanal products. But my wider vision for the city is that through diversity of characters, rather than it just being my business design being replicated, we should be able to create products that suit all communities. And I'd love to see the proliferation of small businesses around the city that are serving some of the migrant communities, and all of the different demographics and all of the different neighborhoods. And I think you co-design your product range with your customers, with the people who come, with the people who are local to you. And it just happens that there's certain products that we have co-designed to suit our audience, and that's what they wanted. But I think if we were in a different area and we applied the same values and logics and the same process, we would just come up with completely different products. And I think even just looking at how Ambigu, the new bakery that Emily's opened across the other side of town, how her products differ from mine, it's a little bit proof of concept, because they're similar in intent, but they are really different in their style. And I think that's the point of trying to encourage many small businesses rather than vertically integrating kind of an expansion of, I don't know, a small set of chains, for example, is that you give other people the chance to co-design within their communities the breads they actually want to make. With regard to price and value, that's kind of a separate issue from style and design, I think, because, and it's a really complex one that will need some huge policy shifts in the UK to actually level the playing field. I believe really strongly that the products that we produce offer better value for people, and that if all of the subsidies were removed from the industrial food system, you'd probably find that we were quite efficient in producing food that was matched in price. But unfortunately, price has become incredibly skewed by a whole load of layers of really complex subsidy and policy and scale issues. So it's probably difficult to give any kind of concrete answer. It's something I've tried to tackle through the population loaf. So we're looking at ways of self-subsidy within the community to make sure that our bread or nourishing bread gets to more people in the immediate neighbourhood. And I'll only know through the process of conversation with them and over time whether that is something that is valued or, well received, and that will be a learning journey in itself. But yeah, I think it's really important to try to get away from the idea of food fads and trends and look at really kind of authentic co-design with a group of customers and a group of farmers and the people who work in production themselves. And I think if you use some of the mechanisms I've described in building a small food producing businesses, that automatically happens in conversation. So that's my hope. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yes, I think so. Great. We've had a question in from John asking, maybe perhaps building on my question a bit from earlier, what do you think needs to happen within the UK grain sector from seeds and varieties and growers, etc., so that your vision can spread?
And one of the most important things that needs to happen is that we need urgent change in the seed marketing legislation in the UK. We have very restrictive seed laws, particularly which affect the ability to produce new varieties and heterogeneous populations, which are not varieties, but they're collections of seeds with mixed genetics, that is potentially a very important tool for combating climate change. So we're in a situation in the UK where there's a national recommended list for seeds, and it's almost impossible to market seeds that are not on that recommended list. And all of the seeds on that list have to pass a test called DUS, and that stands for distinct, uniform, and stable. My philosophy, which is shared by many in the agroecology world and lots of plant breeders around the world, whom I've learnt from, is that we really need diversity at every level, and we need it down to the seed. So the idea of a seed clone that's distinct, uniform, and stable is perhaps not a very good tool for resilience in farming in a climate uncertain future, but it is a very convenient tool for corporate ownership of our seed. So for me, changing the seed marketing laws in the UK would open up opportunities for plant breeders to work in the public service instead of for corporate gain, and for them to be more imaginative without the restriction of these archaic laws. And I would hope that then we could find some kind of way of publicly funding plant breeding again, and have people breeding wheats and other cereals with participation from the people who eat them and grow them, instead of doing it with only the goal to serve a global commodity market. For me personally, in terms of like how that might help like perpetuate small bakeries, it's been really important to me to have a relationship right back to the seed, and to know more about the crops that we're using and milling. So having this relationship with the YQ population and being able to understand where it came from and the philosophy under which it was brought into the world has given me a real sense of purpose as a baker. And I really believe that if other people could have that opportunity to form those relationships with seeds and crops that have characters that are unique to them, that maybe make bread that's a bit different from everyone else's bread, I think it will add a lot of meaning to the work of a baker and also the character of a local bakery. So I think that the two things probably seem really far apart, but they're for me intrinsically linked.
You mentioned that you have been going to farming conferences and having conversations with plant breeders about things like breeding for flavor. What has been the response that you've received from that end of the chain to that idea?
Initially, it was like astonishment. I think it was just astonishment on both sides, because when we raised the question, I think a lot of people in the agricultural world who we were talking to were just astonished to realize that no one had really asked the question before. But then it's immediately obvious that it might be important. And then we were astonished that they were so astonished that nobody had asked the question before. So we just set to work really and thought, well, let's just feed these things back to people and then give them that extra experience of having a sensory feedback loop, as well as all of the agronomy and all of the science that goes with it. And I think there's a philosophy that comes with that that's really important. Just about like valuing your own sensory perception and your own bodily and lived experience above what you're told, or what you're told is right or wrong. And allowing you to, as a baker, for example, follow your own lines of inquiries about how you might make something, instead of sticking to fairly rigid sort of industry standards about how things should be done. And I think if we could do that, we would sort of diversify the foods that were on offer and have a way more interesting selection of things to choose from as customers. Not many people do breed. I mean, I think hardly anyone breeds for flavour. I actually haven't come across anyone who is breeding for flavour. There are projects that maybe accidentally arrive at a flavourful result, but sometimes people don't even realise. And there are certainly older varieties of wheat that seem to have flavour. And then there's interesting investigations into looking at coloured wheats that seem to carry a bit more flavour. And I don't know where we go from here, but wouldn't it be brilliant if we could have more tasty staple crops? I it's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, great. Okay, we've had one question come in from Hillary on how did you start baking? You said you didn't start with any formal training. So what made you take up baking specifically? And how could you suggest a way to inspire young people to experience the joy of baking and not mind the hard work if they haven't really been exposed to it?
Well, I started at home, and I actually joined a women's institute market when I was 21, and it was a volunteer market where you could bake things at home and take them to the market, and then everyone would collectively man the stalls and sell them. So rather than having your own stall, you could bake bread and it would just go onto the bread stall, and then you maybe help out with jam stall or serve tea or whatever. And it was super fascinating to me, the idea of this cooperative market. And I don't think I was particularly driven by making one product or another. I just loved the idea that I could have a play at my home, in my home kitchen, and bake things at a higher quantity than what I needed for my own household, and then have other people appreciate them. I think it was a really enjoyable experience. And just through reading lots of baking books, became intrigued by the idea of sourdough and came across Dan Lepard's book. I think it's called The Handmade Loaf. It's one of the best baking books, I think. And I just started following his technique for making sourdough, and I sold 10 loaves every Friday at, in a ballroom space in the centre of Nottingham as part of this Women's Institute market. And I really loved it. And I think that was gave me the bug in a way. It was just this idea that you can make this thing that people really appreciate. Yeah, and it's just a really satisfying process. I'm not sure how I would encourage young people to get involved in baking. I would certainly encourage schools to put a baking program in place to teach everybody how to bake. I think everyone should learn how to bake. But I think if a young person wanted to get into baking, then I would certainly encourage them to look for one of the more ecologically minded bakeries that exist in the UK, and they would probably have a much more pleasant introduction to the idea of the baking world, and working in a nicer environment with people who really care, rather than going into sort of factory style production. I think it's much more enjoyable to do things at the smaller scale. So if you can find a way to intern or gain some experience at one of these sort of bakers that works on a small scale with local crops, I think that would be a really amazing way to start a career in food.
Mm. Do you find that there are programs available that teach that type of baking and would be in a more educational setting, or would it primarily be within a bakery that you'd have to learn that?
Most people learn on the job the style of baking that we do. There are, you can go to college and obviously learn baking, but I think it's sort of, from what I can tell, the courses are geared a bit more towards food technology and working in bigger businesses. There's an excellent school here in Nottinghamshire called the School of Artisan Food, and they teach a 6-month baking diploma. It's very expensive. So it tends to attract mature students who are looking for a career change and maybe have the wealth and privilege to be able to make that investment in themselves. But I do think they have some bursary places as well. So it's worth checking that out. And that's like a 6-month intensive bakery skills course with lots of time spent in bakeries like mine. We take 2 students a year for work placement, and other amazing bakeries around the country take in their students. So that's the only thing I can really think of. But it's certainly possible to learn on the job. And I think most people enter, food production and hospitality like that. And if you're humble and you're open to learning and you work hard and prepared to be a good teammate, then I think other people will always take time to teach you, and kind of bounce off your enthusiasm. So it's not entirely necessary to spend all that money on the education, although it would be a really good fast track and probably very good for a young person who still needs to be in that educational setting.
Great. Okay, we've had a question come in from Joy on how might other towns and cities find and support more Kims to grow a small food business culture and network. wondering if there might be a way to collaborate on sponsoring interns from different places to learn from Kim about the small food business approach as well as the baking on your business model. Do you have ideas for how it could spread beyond Nottingham?
Yeah, I think it is spreading beyond Nottingham. It's probably very slow and invisible, but I definitely feel like I'm part of a network of other like similarly minded businesses, and we may be sort of small in number, but I think we're doing a good job of bringing people along for the ride, and I hope that it will start to show some fruit, bear some fruit in the years to come. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think for me, we have a lot of visiting interns, and I'm always open to people coming if they're keen to learn and to take that back to the place where they live. I think for me, what I'd really love to demonstrate is that we could build some kind of momentum here in Nottingham with a supportive structure, and then maybe it can be replicated somewhere else. I feel very much that I'm still in the phase of proving the model, and people are attracted to it, but then they're also a bit cynical about what a difference it could make. So I've really returned personally back to Nottingham and wanting to try to build this momentum, or build a kind of, I'm trying to say, build a kind of core of people who are all demonstrating that it works well and are networked together. And then maybe there can be something that comes out of it. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer because I don't think there are any sort of silver bullets in terms of how you can support other people. Make space available is probably the first problem that needs solving, you know, whether that's at policy level or whether it's just at a community level, like make a kitchen available for passionate people to step into it at low risk and do their thing and support them. And if you have businesses that are even partway in the right direction for you in your locality, then go and join in, like go and support them and get in conversation with them and encourage them to keep going and encourage them to push harder and network as much as they can. Keep pushing forward. It's important to take part. It's important for everyone to take part. It doesn't matter if what your role is in the community. There's a role for everybody, I think, in a supporting a small bakery or small food business.
Great. Okay, we've got a question in, a couple of great questions, a few great questions. One is from Joanne. She's saying, I have begun my journey to create food sourced from more local suppliers, but since we create foods which are inspired from the Caribbean, it feels really difficult it's a difficult task to find to localize our ingredients. And what would you advise bakers who are creating cultural foods to be more sustainable in sourcing their ingredients?
That's a fantastic question. And I can only really respond anecdotally with my own experience. So when I came to baking, ideas about what I wanted to make and what success might look like. And I think what I've learned is that to join in with a more agroecological approach and to be able to engage with local ingredients, to some extent, I have to set those aside, those preconceptions that I have about what my products are going to be like. And at first I felt a bit sad about that, like maybe I was letting go of some part of the passion or ideal of what I'd set out to do. And later I've come to realize that it's actually really rewarding, and that you start to reinvent and reimagine the products through a more important lens. So whereas your cultural starting point might be rooted in what currently exists, all food is evolving all the time, and there's no reason why you don't have permission to evolve it in whatever way you see fit, you know, drawing upon the kind of philosophies and ideas and flavors and kind of the things that the Caribbean food culture evokes, and always holding those close is like really important. But that doesn't mean you need to be very rigid and stick to pre-designed ideas of what those products need to look like. I think it's important to recognize that the food that we have now and the things that we think are kind of correct or perfect or good or authentic were probably really different even 10 years ago, and we don't remember, you know. Things change all the time, and I think it's really empowering it's really important to feel empowered that you can be the driver of change, and it's up to you to kind of design the next phase. And that can be whatever you want it to be. And it doesn't mean that you're dishonoring authenticity or your kind of cultural heritage. But my advice would be to do it as a co-design process with your community and with your customer base, and they'll tell you if you're going in the wrong direction or whether they're prepared to accept it. But my one piece of advice would just be brave and go for it. It's your work, it's your food. You can do it in whatever way you want.
Mm-hmm. And one person's asked in response to that, so how would you define local, and what if the local alternative is grown with chemicals and more distant ingredients or grown sustainably? How do you go about weighing all of those different factors?
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. For me, I had to redefine my idea of local in order to move forward in a practical way. And for me, local is not about geographic proximity. It's about the ability to have meaningful relationship, reciprocal relationship. So it really depends on the actual ingredient. So for example, it's really important to me that I get dairy products like milk and cream quite locally, and that they shouldn't travel too far. And I'm prepared to compromise a little bit on the kind of farming ideals of that. There's a point where you lose your appetite and you're not prepared to go lower. And that's why the relationship's really important. So if you need to use suppliers that you can visit and that you can, and that who are very transparent and open with you about the way they do things. And I think if you visit a farm and you've had a tour and you've learned everything you can learn in that time about what they do and why they do it and the people behind it and their intentions, and you've walked the land and you've seen the condition of the animals, if you've still got an appetite to eat that food, then it's okay. And like, I think the important thing for me is to be in dialogue with people and to help support ways forward. And it's not going to be possible to just immediately have all the ingredients in a perfect way all the time. You've got to accept that people are always on a journey, and ideally you work with people who are really passionate about improving and pushing forward. So with grain crops, for example, like I would work with anyone in the UK and I could consider it local, because I only really need to visit them once a year or twice a year, and I'd hope that they might come and visit me once a year, and that's enough of a relationship with those annual crops to understand a bit about the progression of their farm and the direction it's going, and give them feedback. But yeah, it just depends on the ingredient, and there's obviously real challenges when dealing with ingredients that are imported from other countries. But if you feel you can have a relationship with that farm, and that farmer, even if it's in Spain or Italy or Chile or wherever it may be, then for me that's local enough. Like, it's just about relationships, and the idea of geographic proximity as a goal for a quality standard doesn't really make that much sense to me. It's just about whether or not you can be in community and help collectively improve things with each.
Yeah, great. Okay, so a great question from Robin. She says, we've taken the school-based bakery approach in rural Nepali schools in South Asia since 2018, and we're using a social entrepreneurship model, but one key challenge has been the training and building the capacity of local community women as bakers and as managers. Any suggestions on tackling this challenge?
I wonder what it is that the sticking point might be, without understanding the cultural conditions in that specific place. I'm not sure that I can give an answer, but I'd be happy to wait for a bit further information and then try and answer. There's probably some, I think people need to feel like they're valued, and people need to feel like what they're doing is really meaningful. And if I just maybe make a comparison with the situation here in the UK, like why would someone want to become a baker? Well, often their motivation is because they're really passionate about creating things or working with their hands, and they like the idea of doing a physical job. And then often what happens after a few years is they become quite disillusioned with it, and they can't really see the point of it, and they realize they're really tired and that they're perhaps being slightly overworked by their employer, and they tend to fall out of love with it. And what I've experienced is that by bringing people into the Grain Lab community and getting them working in partnership with farmers and millers has brought like this huge sense of purpose to the job of being a baker. And I know it does for me. Like if I'm really tired and I don't really want to carry on, I think about the connection that I have to the farms, and I think about the connection that I have to the customers who I know, and I know who I'm working for. And that gets me through the day, because sometimes the work is just very monotonous and physical. So I wonder if like those are simple, very human motivational tools, and whether they can be embedded at a very early stage in the way that the work is designed in these bakeries, that might help to both motivate people and keep and retain them. Is thinking about what's meaningful for them. The other thing is with my team, they taught me a lot about how to get the best out of people, and I think they were very motivated by having autonomy and being allowed to pursue their own interests within the bakery. So it's how do you let people bring their own personalities into work and their own interests. It's a bit of a loose example, but something that always stuck in my mind was that David, one of our bakers, came into small food having had no previous experience working in food or hospitality. And I often wondered what his motivation was for, beyond enjoying the delicious food and having been a customer of the bakery, what his motivation was for wanting to come and learn. And it was hard work. And he worked really hard to upskill himself from a standing start. And it was on a farm walk one day when I realized that the thing that he was really interested in was the birds on the farm. And there was this wonderful moment when we were standing in a field of the wheat that he would use to make biscuits, which were part of his production specifically and part of his responsibility. And the farmers were telling us about the bird survey that had just been done on the farm, and how it was the broadest of anywhere in the country, like diversity of bird life in this particular spot. And we were just standing in the biscuit wheat field, and that was going to be the biscuits that David made. And I kind of like really made that connection and realized that people hold such personal level of interest that connects them to whatever it is they're doing, and it's finding what that motivation is in that individual, and then allowing them to connect that to their work in some way. It's not easy to do as a leader. I'm not saying that I have achieved that, but I think it's very obvious to me that that's an ideal that could be strived towards in terms of motivating people. Interestingly, David left small food at Christmas and is now pursuing a career in conservation ecology and is loving doing lots of work with birds. But I suspect we'll always be connected to the bakery in some way, and he will advocate within that community for better food and the connection between those two things. So yeah, everybody needs to feel like they are seen, and that their own interests can shine through. Can bakeries be designed? This is a question, not a conclusion, but can bakeries be designed to support the individual personalities of all the people that operate within them?
Okay, we're going to answer one last question, which is a really good one, and then I think wrap up. This is a question from Stephen regarding co-creation. Do your customers ever request products that you're not really interested in making, or that you feel don't fit with small food bakery?
Yes, and depending on my level of energy at the time, I'll try to engage in that conversation. But one of the difficult things that I've found is people requesting breads that maybe they have been told are the only bread they can eat for their digestive system because they have IBS or something like that. So, for example, they'll request spelt sourdough, and I feel like I feel sad that I can't give them what they want, but it's sort of not part of the farming system that I'm engaging with, and it just doesn't feel like it wouldn't be right for me to just go and buy commodity spelt just to service that one or very few customers. And it's an uncomfortable situation when people kind of come to you looking for solutions to some of their dietary problems and you can't really help. Gluten-free products gets requested a lot, and that's not something I've ever been able to. I've never had the energy to kind of focus on that. It's something as an industry I think we can all maybe start to learn about and work harder at, but it's very difficult in a small business to achieve the kind of segregation that enables you to even say something is gluten-free. So that's been difficult. And also, you know, other kind of restrictive diet requirements like veganism. It's quite hard when you've been busting a gut to work to build a local dairy supply, and then someone comes in and they can't eat the thing that you've been working really hard to develop in collaboration with the farmer. So it doesn't always work, but I feel like if there was more of us, then people would take on the different challenges and they would serve different people's needs, and a bit more diversity of choice for people, and hopefully collectively we could provide something for everyone. But as a small business, you definitely can't be everything to everyone. You could kill yourself trying to do it. So, I think, you know, we always we had an approach which I tried to teach, or we tried to develop and then teach to everyone who worked within the team, of kind of kindness and approaching those requests in conversation, and to try to get to the bottom of what it is that person really needed and whether we could point them in the direction of something that might be useful. That was always our approach.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Thanks for all the great questions and the great discussion. Kimberly, thank you for your work and sharing your work with us. And unless you had any closing remarks, I think we can wrap it up, but this has been really wonderful. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. The recording will be available on YouTube, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one in June. All right. Thank you. Bye.